they drive home and they tell their parents what happened to her. And that's how the book ends. I know I started off giving commentary, and by like the near end, I was just reading, telling you what the story was saying without any sort of commentary on it. But the ending part of this book was just, to me, it took too long to get here to the ending part. I feel like this didn't need to be this long, and could have, the second book and this book could have, I just feel like this didn't need to be this long. This could have been a short story, like a shorter book, like one of those novellas. This being the length that it was didn't feel necessary, because like I understood that it took her time to get there, get that. But some of the content that was given felt like it was just so out of place and unnecessary. It was just like if you were trying to beef it up to try to give it more story to make it something, when more explanation of her thoughts, or at least the emotions she was feeling even though she was confused, like, would have been more beneficial. So if you want to make this story about essay, it felt like make the story about what it is about, instead of trying to add so many different characters and trying to have so many different storylines go on in it. How I explain it, it doesn't sound like if there were many different storylines, but the other guy that the friend was trying to push her off onto, at some point I think she tries to go out with him just so that she could sleep with him, but he doesn't sleep with her, and she gets upset. And it was like, what was the point of that? The friend pushing her to do that, what was the point of that? The friend and the person that she likes, they felt a bit stuck up, just a little bit. It felt like if no one really understood her, and I get that that was the point, that no, it felt isolating. Yeah, good on that. It also felt like her friends are not really her friends. They have no idea what's going on with this girl. And it felt like if they should have known sooner that something was wrong with her and tried to figure out what was wrong with her, and no one had a clue what was going on with her, that something was up, or that they tried to figure out that something was up, and it just didn't feel authentic. That if these are your best friends and they're so close to you, not saying that they should have guessed that she was R-worded, but like, when somebody changes completely, 180 degrees different person, and you're just gonna accept that and be like, yeah, that's cool. But then you see her doing dangerous behaviors, and there's like a part where they had gone to like a party and she just disappeared for a little bit. And the friend never asked anything about it. And it was like, is that even your friend? So this book, it isn't, I didn't really like it, to be quite honest. I did read the second book, even though I wasn't a huge fan of the first book. I'm glad I read the second book, because I always like to finish series. And you can wait till next week to see my opinion on the second book. Um, but this story, I like the essence of it. I don't like how it was fleshed out. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Fiction and Feelings. Today we're doing book 2, The Way I Am Now by Amber Smith. So last week we would have talked about the way I used to be, and I would have said, didn't really like it. It wasn't the greatest. It was okay. I would have done a read with me, so I would have literally gone through the entire book, and I would have talked about what my thoughts were while I was reading the book. You can comment down below your thoughts, or what do you think my thoughts are for this book. But first, I will get into reading the summary. Eden and Josh have never had a fair shot at a healthy relationship. When they dated in high school, they each had their own problems getting in the way of a deep connection they felt towards each other. Unbeknownst to Josh, Eden was carrying the burden of a devastating sexual assault, while Josh was dealing with his own private struggle of having an alcoholic father. Months after, Eden and the two other girls publicly accusing their R word is Eden is starting college while her case goes to trial. Now, when she and Josh reconnect, it seems like they might be in the right place at the right time for them to make it work. But is their love strong enough to withstand challenges and chaos of college and crushing realities of a trial that would determine whether Eden gets the justice she deserves? So, I will start off, since this is a part two, I'll start off by saying, loved this book way more than the first book. So, it was way better. Would I say it was a great book? Maybe. But I do love the fact that it was written 10 years later and it shows the author's growth since the first book that she wrote. I would say that the story, the emotions, the grasp of the entire context of this book feels more fleshed out and more true. Yeah, that's the best way that I could put that. Because the first book, it felt so confusing, as I said. If you can't remember, watch the last episode of Fiction and Feelings where I talk about the way I used to be. The way I am now, for me, shows how she was dealing with the trauma, the panic attacks that she was having, the nightmares that she was having, the need to be on medication for the anxiety, for the barely sleeping, for the stability from just needing it for the depression. And her going to see a therapist, her figuring out how to be in large crowds because of her fears, her figuring out how to navigate being different because she is different. She isn't the same Eden that she was when she was 14 before he abused her. She is the new Eden. And whether we want to accept it or not, you change after those things and you're not going to be that person that you were before. That's not necessarily a bad thing though. You can be better. You can take it and grow. You can rise above it. You don't have to let it control you or make you suffer because of it. It's a really unfortunate circumstance and it sucks and it causes you to go through stuff that you should have never had to go through. However, you can't change that it happened in the past, but you can learn from it and grow from it. You shouldn't have to, but you can. And to me, reading this book, even though no time for the characters has passed, going from the way I used to be to the way I am now, you can tell the time that Amber has had to sit on the story, to get the feedback on the story. And it is better writing, in my opinion. I am not as confused on the character that I'm supposed to be following. Yes, she goes through some things that you may not understand, and we're navigating it with her, and we're navigating it with Josh because this is a dual POV book, while the way that I used to be was all in Eden's perspective. I do like that we get Josh's perspective. I love that the first book was only in Eden's perspective because it was her story to tell. I didn't feel as though it needed to have more than one person narrating that story. But I do like that this story is dual perspective. I love Josh's perspective on things. I love the struggle that he is going through being depicted because it's not often mentioned that the survivor's family, the survivor's partners, the survivor's friends also have to survive the situation. They also have to go through their own trauma because somebody was traumatized. So let's put that in other words. She had to face what Kevin did to her and he has to deal with the traumatizing stuff that happens when she's having nightmares. At a point in the book, she physically assaults him. She's asleep and she's having a nightmare and she has no idea that it's him and she didn't mean to harm him. But this is heavy stuff. They're children, essentially. Even though they're in university, even though they are young adults, they're still babies when it comes to emotions. And this is a heavy topic to deal with. It's a heavy topic for anybody to deal with. And no matter what age you're at, it will always be hard for you and for those around you to constantly be there and supporting you. And that's not to say that you're a burden or that you shouldn't have support or that you shouldn't lean on them. You should. But it's also difficult for them to see someone that they love be in that amount of pain, be struggling like that, because that's what they're doing. They have to watch you fight demons essentially to get through what you're getting through. And they have to watch you be tortured by and not be able to help. They have to be patient with you and try to help you overcome anxieties, overcome fears, and they have to watch what they're doing and kind of step on eggshells, not because they think that you can't handle it, but you really can't for some parts of it. You until you are able to fully handle it, you can't handle it. And they do need to walk on eggshells, especially at the beginning, which is kind of what's going on here. We have her exploring the fact that she has to go through the hearing where they even decide if there's going to be a trial with the jury, etc. And she has to tell her story in front of him. She has to tell her story to people. And it's her choice who she tells it in front of in terms of like her family and friends, partially because her mom and her brother are also testifying, so they don't get to see her actually say what she's saying and she doesn't get to see them say what they're saying. So she doesn't have a choice with that one. But she didn't want Josh to be there. He was trying to support. He didn't know how to support. He wanted to be there for her, but she did allow her friend Mara to be there for her. She practiced telling the story and then was able to look at Mara while she was saying it in court for the judge to hear, for her abuser to hear. And it was tough going through all of those emotions with her and having to navigate allowing Josh to be in her life again, finding a balance of I'm going to go to work, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to go to school far away because she does go to school 4 hours away from home. Her parents wanted her to stay and do classes occasionally, but she felt trapped. And that's another thing that I feel isn't talked about because people don't realize that after something traumatizing has happened to you, it's not just that you have to be trapped in a bubble and that you can't ever live life again. You can live life again and you should live life again. You shouldn't be held down and having to struggle and never getting to be who you want to be ever again. But you have to be mindful. So the people who are around you who watch you struggle also have to like grow with you, kind of. They have to help you be able to manage on your own. And sometimes it's hard for them to watch you struggle so much and then for them to let go. And I found that that was probably what was happening with her mom and dad. It was hard for them to let go. They did mention the dad being angry, and I don't think that we got to touch enough on his anger because in parts it feel like if he was blaming his children for what was going on. And I don't think that that's why he was angry. And I don't really think that we got much explanation as to why he was angry, and it felt like if he was blaming them. And I don't think that she did the dad justice with that. If he was blaming them, why was he blaming them? Like, speak about that because there is a truth in that, that not every single person's parents or support system, I shouldn't say support system, people around them will be understanding. Not everyone will be accepting the truth of what happened. Some people will blame them. So if he's blaming them, why is he blaming them? Talk about that. Open up that if you want to open that up. Don't just leave it as like a little side sprinkle and not actually touch on that. I I didn't really like that part, but the mom was more supportive and more there and trying to be there the best that she could. And I love the development of that relationship. She wasn't holding on to her and trying to control her. They were allowing her to go to school. When she does go to school, I love that they didn't make her move in with Josh automatically and that they had her live in the same building but with a roommate and still experience the individuality. I love that because it's often like when you experience a new relationship after the trauma, you can find yourself just wanting that person to be your everything. And I find that that's the story that happened with them and trying to navigate how to not be that person's everything, how to not suffocate them, how you can deal with the trauma that you're going through, how they can deal with the trauma that you are going through, and that they are also going through and navigate that. And I think that that's the essence of what the story was. So I love that they didn't make them live together and it wasn't a this is all sunshine and rainbows and it can be great always. Like this she still needed that space to grow, to be a college student and to experience that experience that way instead of experiencing it automatically with like a boyfriend and him being everything. I love the dynamic of the friends that came in. I actually felt like these are her actual friends because as you would remember in the previous video I talked about how I was like questioning the friends, like are they even her friends? Because I was just like this is so confusing as to really what is going on here. Y'all don't seem like friends at all, but these friends challenged them but also spoke to them and were supportive and were there for them and didn't let anything slide, even the point where he gets hit by Eden, the physical assault that she did to him while the nightmare was going on. The friend came in and was automatically defensive of Eden, thinking that because she saw the bruises of like him holding her and like her bleeding. So she was just like, no, did you just hurt her? Like, you have to get out of here. It wasn't a questioning and like questioning in the sense of not believing her and because that roommate was friends with him first, but she was ready to do what needed to be done if justice needed to be served against somebody. And I love that. I love his friend and his roommate and how they had a great dynamic of just talking and they were involved in so many different parts of this story and it felt like a family away from her family and it felt like a bond and I liked that element of it. I When you explore their relationship, looking at them as a couple, I do think way more communication needed to be had because she was so ashamed of taking her medication and he was so trying not to push too hard that there was some stuff that they were both keeping from each other. And I think that the third act breakup that always happens could have not happened if they would have just communicated properly. He should have been going to therapy, honestly, because that's too much for him to handle by himself. Like, not that she's too much of a person, but she's going through a lot, and it is too much for him to handle with school, with his dad, with all of it. It's too much for him, and he should have been talking to somebody and figuring out a way to deal with it instead of trying to be the hero, instead of trying to be the one that's super understanding and dealing with everything and taking on everything. I feel like if it should have really been he was also getting help at that time and he could communicate and have his support system. But he did in the end because he started to go to AA meetings that are for family and for addicts. And I thought that that was such a great touch that they allowed him to explore that. They, meaning like the author of the book, allowed exploration for that storyline, and showing the dad like he hates basketball. He doesn't want to play basketball, and he would rather do psychology classes, and he would rather quit. Um, I honestly feel like a critique I would have about this book: the stuff that happens in the third act breakup happened too fast. The That could have been stretched out, and instead of them having a third act breakup, like that could have been dealt with, like talked about more, because I don't feel as though people talk about those things enough. So him going to AA and confronting that and talking to people, that could have been covered more, but it wasn't. It was just like oh, I finally did this, and I finally quit the team, and I finally switched majors, and it was all like in the blink of an eye that he did that, but everything else was like fleshed out. And I guess she did that for time, but it felt like the first half of this book was spent too much fleshing out their relationship instead of like the hard topics. And it is a contemporary romance, so like the focus is on the romance of it. But I feel like like the third act breakup didn't have to happen, because if they had just communicated, and not even in the typical, usually you feel like oh in a third act breakup in a romance book, you usually feel like, oh, that was so stupid. They could have really just communicated. This was a heavy topic. This was heavy discussions that needed to be had. And if they were just honest, and if they were open about therapy, open about needing to talk to somebody, open about that discussion, I feel like it would have made their relationship stronger. And I think it did make their relationship stronger. And it would have been beneficial to the audience to see. Okay, so we got cut off. So if I've moved, that's why. I think I was saying that it would have been beneficial for the audience to see the changes that they made at the end of the book. So to watch him go through his AA, to watch him end his basketball career, to watch him change his major, to watch him grow in Alcoholics Anonymous with his mom, to watch her grow into herself and to stand on her 2 feet and to feel like if she was enough or that she wasn't too much, because I think he tells her that she's too much or that all of this is too much. I can't really fully remember the sentence that he says. Hopefully I put it on the screen. But that would have been beneficial for the audience to see and to experience, and therefore it would have made it a lot better to experience. I do think that the dad and finding out why he was upset and watching that dynamic, and that would have been part of her growing story, to like not care about the dad if she didn't want to care about the dad, like if he was upset or not, and talking about that. I love the growth of this book. I love the fact that it was a romance. So maybe that's why it wasn't focused on the growth elements of them individually. However, I loved seeing their story and their dynamic, and I do feel as though Amber grew in her writing, and it was a much better book. I don't fully remember because I had said a whole bunch that got cut off, so I don't fully remember all of the things that I was saying, but I do think that this book is maybe like a 4, or I would have said 3.5, but maybe a 4, because it grew from the first book, and the first book was way too confusing and I didn't understand, and it felt like if my brain wasn't inside of her brain, and it felt like if she was having a completely different conversation. But with this, it felt like I'm finally here. I'm finally understanding what's going on. And it felt like it was such a perfect story with the psychology of it all, to look, not just focus on the assault, but to focus on them as individuals and the story about how people grow from being in those situations and how they're dynamic and how their relationships grow. And I felt like it was so good to talk about this, but I do think that some things in the book could have been expanded on, and some things didn't have to be fleshed out as far as they had to be fleshed out. I think that she was trying to do too much justice to too many different things, and instead of like telling the story, like finishing, like continuing to tell the story, this felt like a wrap up book. And I would say that although I love the characters, I don't think it needs another book. I didn't think that there was going to be another book, but it was a good book. It was a good wrap up, kind of. I do think that there were some elements that needed to be fleshed out in the wrap up for it to really talk about the things that she wanted to talk about, but it was still leaving you okay with some of it, at least to some extent. So I liked this book. I think in the future I want to read Verity because I know there's a movie coming out, and I also think Regretting You because they just announced the cast recently. So I would like to read those two books and watch the movies and compare them, but I don't know how soon that would be because I don't know the release dates of those movies. But you can comment down below any movies that you would like to see me review or books that you would like to see me review. Have a little commentary on. Unfortunately, this video got cut, so I'm not fully sure. If I do have anything else I want to add that I remember, I will hopefully do a voiceover. But I think I got all the parts that I wanted to say out about this book. It was a good book. I liked the dynamics. I liked the conversations that were started. I think other more people I would recommend this book to be read. First book, not so much, but you obviously have to get through that book to get to this book. It took one day to read this book. I was so wrapped up in it. The other book took me so long to read because I was just so confused. I was so frustrated that I couldn't understand. But this book was a good book. Anyways, thanks for watching. Bye, guys.